Welcome to Reflections, a program where we discuss values and virtues for the transformation of the individual and the society in general. I am Father George Ehusani, and I have with me once again in the studio my friend Dr. Sam Amadi, who worked with me at the Catholic Secretariat as head of our think tank, and then he became special advisor to the Senate President in those days, and then he became chairman of the Nigerian Electricity Regulatory Commission, and now he is a senior lecturer in law at Base University. Welcome once again.
Thank you, Father.
The last segment we discussed Cama 2020 matters arising, and we did quite some analysis of it, and your impression is that the civic space, the fundamental freedoms, including freedom of association, may be in peril if some powers are given to executives, head of regulatory organizations that tend to usurp some of the powers that belong naturally to the courts in a democracy. Now, we also spoke about how this law came about. How come that a lot of the stakeholders, those that will be affected by the new sections of the law, how come that we are all shouting because we are just seeing them? So let's discuss this time what the real processes for lawmaking should be in a democracy, and especially the people's participation, popular participation, participation of stakeholders in any law that will affect them, whichever way.
Okay, you know, the premise of what we call representative democracy,
yes,
is that the people themselves govern through their representatives.
So it is the people. Democracy is the government of the people, by the people, for
through,
the
now through their, you know, democracy is government of the people, by the people, for the people.
Through their
but now
representatives.
in small cities where people gather together, the antennas, and some southeast states, people argue historically where the village square.
The village square, yeah.
So democracy, that definition works by the people themselves. They take turn to make rules for themselves, take turn to serve in the judiciary and all that. But modern democracy is now based on representation. The idea is that
the nations are bigger.
We now elect our representatives,
yes,
who go there as if we're the ones. And
yes,
the great British scholar and parliamentarian argued that, look, Bentham, he says, the theory, he called it the trustee, not the agent. He said the representative is the trustee, not the agent of the people. Being a trustee, therefore, means that he goes there to exercise his best brain on behalf of the people. Not like he goes there to ask the people, what should I do? The people invest him with power. Now, what that means, therefore, is that oftentimes you discover that representatives now become autonomous and behave as if they are not representatives. They are there to transact and strike deals that they think is good for them. But what makes democracy strong, even in democracy, is the need that they must either referendums are inserted, recalls
are possible,
constituency touchdown. So you from Washington, you go back to your constituency, organize constituency meetings. This is what is going on.
You are supposed to have the constituency office, and you go from time to time
to the other place, and they tell them, look, these are the issues, and then of course there's a hotline
between your people and yourself.
So what that means, therefore, that important issues are taken back. This is, again, apart from your geopolitical constituency, you have a social constituency. All the groups that maybe you are a liberal parliamentarian or you are a conservative. So the conservative causes, the institutions are there.
They are part of your stakeholders.
So you go to them, the think tanks that are, dealing with those issues. Because today we're dealing with a divisive society where the issue is the issue-based legislation. So people you focus on the issue. So if you're a Catholic, a parliamentarian, you ought to touch down with the church on an issue like this and say,
that can affect
this
us,
is what's going on. What's the church position? Because you claim to carry the vision of the church.
Yes.
If you are an Islamic legislator, you ought to also touch down and say, there's this law. How does it affect us? So that's why democracy becomes, and that's why the majority carries the day, and the minorities are protected.
Yes.
So what we have seen is a failure of democracy, even globally, but more so in our society, where, one, the representatives themselves are not representative enough. They now behave, they don't have link with constituencies that take them there. They represent either special interests, they are captured, or their own interests. The second point is that because society is not diverse and loss of trust in government and institutions, in fact, in many of the polls they do, even the Pew Research Foundation, we discovered that the legislature has the lowest trust quotient. People just don't trust legislators. So what that means, therefore, that people disengage from thinking about what they do. And that disengagement becomes expensive. That oftentimes you discover that a terrible law has been passed, especially in our country where both illiteracy, high level of functional illiteracy, basically.
Functional illiteracy. I mean, people who went to school but they don't read.
Functional illiteracy. Poverty has now eviscerated any form of public-spiritedness. You know, people are not really public-spirited. They are trapped in workaday world,
bread and butter.
Look for what to eat, and so they are not really paying attention. And then we don't have endowments, you know, support foundation, philanthropy that creates alternative centers that take upon themselves the responsibility of becoming citizens, watchdogs. So what I mean is that the few NGOs we have are NGOs who are probably focusing on, because they are funded also from, you know, other places.
Many are not funded here.
Locally. So they are also focusing on those fancy points that
those
budget reform,
yes,
that they are
those sponsors
absolutely are trading. So they don't find locally group social movements like the US. Part of what makes democracy strong is social movements. Social movements are movements that are organic. They grow out of society. They are focusing on.
Look, my experience in my 1 year in Germany is that every diocese had a social movement, and down to parishes.
Absolutely.
They had a social movement that met the way we used to meet Catholic Secretariat Forum every month.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So members are
consistently discussing issues that affect them.
And they're not beholden to foreign interests. So they're not looking for fancy project that Germany wants or America wants or New York. They are dealing with things that concern them. So those kind of groups.
And it is from those social movements that representatives arose.
Exactly. So people are being groomed. So people show interest, they specialize, they show knowledge, and they are pushed forward probably as county councillors, and those who are going to be running small elections until they become big politicians. So what this means that there's a democracy deficit.
There is nothing that is rising from the grassroots.
Absolutely.
When we talk about the processes of emergence of leaders, the flawed processes for emergence of leaders.
Exactly.
This
part of it. Again, because the electoral system is not tied to performance or issues, the legislator who goes there knows that there's no cost for not paying attention to issues that matter to people. So if, for example, this bill is passed, then people will how many times have you asked who sponsored a bill? Now,
and when he sponsored the bill, my senator, my House of Representatives, where were you? Didn't you see this?
You know, like US now today, Biden is being attacked for the criminal reform bill that ostensibly put many blacks in prison. Now, because people trusted to him, why did you pass this bill? So you have to pay consequence for passing a bill whose impact was. But in Nigeria, how many times have we penalized politicians for passing those bills? So basically, we are not there at all. There is no consequence for poor representation. When the next election cycle comes, if you're happy with the party leaders, you get.
There is even no consequence for if we discover that our representative was not in the house during the period during the period this thing was discussed.
When I was a student at Harvard, there was a representative from the Southeast who was a student of Harvard doing LLM while being a rep, full-time rep. And it's my friend. He's late now. So he was here.
From Nigeria?
From Nigeria, he was a full-time student doing LLM.
So during that period,
he was absent.
Almost a year?
He was absent. Totally absent. He was with us, and he was a very serious student. It wasn't like he was running.
So full-time. Maybe came home 2-3 times a year? Full-time,
was throughout in school, doing the work, doing very well, smart student, but was not in the
was collecting his pay.
Was not so that's the kind of nature assembly we are running, that kind of democracy. I don't blame them because them say first there are no it's a push factor. Bottom up. People are demanding representation.
Yes, there's no push from below.
People are demanding representation. People want representation. Our democracy is like artificial. Now, when Alexis Tocqueville wrote centuries ago about the democracy in America, he said, look, it's around town hall. The American democracy grew from town hall. That is why the American election is also town hall related. Primaries are done town hall. People go, politicians. Look at the kind of energy that Trump and Biden were exercising in COVID to try to talk to focus groups, use Zoom, go to town halls, talk to groups, meetings. It's even if it is all a way of manipulating the. But it shows that the system recognizes.
And while that was happening in the U.S. and we are watching all that, there are by-elections and there are state elections coming up in Nigeria, and we're not seeing town halls.
No. And nobody's raising issues, and nobody is interrogating.
No, we're talking about personalities.
Yes, and there are no even PAC, what they call political action committee groups, individual groups that set up themselves to fight. So, for example, in Edona, assuming some groups felt that the incumbent did terribly well, they'll form a group themselves and be sponsoring advert. All that this tells you is that people are concerned about how governance impact on them. So that's the real problem with Nigerian democracy.
There is a disconnect.
Totally.
Let's see. Can we trace this disconnect from colonial rule? You see, the colonial system was a top-down system. They came in, invaded these places, destroyed the traditional authority system, and imposed paramount rulers, imposed DO, district officers and those ones had their reference to the UK, to the Queen. They were, whatever they did, it is to satisfy the person who sent them, not the people.
Totally correct.
And even our problem with police brutality and lack of accountability in police, same thing. Yeah. Because the police was in the... it
was a product of regime.
Yes.
It was not... It's the police DNA. And that's why I tell them that when I came out from US, the first job I did for National Assembly was police reform. And the argument I made is that you have to change the DNA. We had a police force which was defined by natives.
Yes.
Keep the natives away.
Yes.
Now, you want to have a police service. And I proposed a police service. And the IG then and others didn't like it. It's a white force. They put a service. The service will make them internalize a sense of accountability.
Not force.
The police force is still replicating the colonial police form. And that's why
I thought they changed it to Nigerian police. I thought they removed force from it.
They removed Nigerian police. I think probably not in the law, Nigerian police. But the idea of service was the notion of accountability. Yeah. That, again, you need to recreate the police in the way that the police are accountable all the way. You look at the rules, process for discipline. It must involve people, civilians, so the people feel the police is part of them. And that's the point you're making about top-down model. We've never been that democratic at all. Yeah. Military rule came after,
and
shortly after.
Military rule is top-down, definitely.
Now, even democracy since 1999 was top-down. The only attempt to, when Babangida them orchestrated the so-called free joiner, free owner, option A4, bottom-up, for Papa, you go to your ward and join and start running. All those were artificial. Until you create a society where, in the terms of norms, people see themselves as the real stakeholder, and the people who make. So you start democracy from a sense of self-ownership, from a sense of self-determination, from a sense that you matter, and then some level of economic well-being, middle-class economy may be necessary, because today in Nigeria, the level of poverty, deprivation, people forget that Nigeria is not just a poor country. The poorest probably in terms of large number in the world. But Nigeria is one of the most, if not the most unequal country in the world.
Oh, no. And that inequality is widening further and further.
Democracy does not survive under very high inequality. In fact, democracy can survive with high poverty,
but not with high level inequality.
Because high level inequality, therefore, means that we're not the same. Citizens are not the same. So how can we be self-determinant if we are not the same? In fact, the inequality in Nigeria is almost like, if you like, anthropological. That means different levels of species.
Yes, apartheid. Some kind of apartheid.
Absolutely. So that makes democracy difficult. Which of these people who have been, so they have weaponized poverty, accountability is not there, and the rules of engagement. You see, if you look at National Assemblies, the procedures, they are still elitist, so, urban setting. So maybe you come to Abuja. If you're in Abuja, you walk in. If you care, if you have that resources, if you have the luxury that entrepreneurship gives you or capitalism gives you, then you can walk to the National Assembly and watch the proceeding.
Public hearing.
They can then participate in public hearing if you are invited, or even if you know.
But the poor person in Abuja...
How will you even walk through the National Assembly? I used to work there as special advisor. I don't go there anymore because the process of getting clearance to enter that building is easier for you to go to White House.
Yes. When I visit America, you just go to the lawn.
You go there and watch, even though you may not enter there. But there's no parameter of National Assembly where you can step in if you are ordinary Nigeria. So those things matter. The architecture of an environment.
So that's already a symbol
of inclusion.
Yeah. I remember when Bishop Kuka visited me in 1988 or something, and we went to the White House. Bishop Kuka was interested in visiting the White House, whatever. by then there was no terrorism. We just walked around the White House, and I mean,
you don't go fast. South Africa, if you go to the presidential villa office, whatever you call it,
yes,
the Republic House, when we went there,
in Pretoria,
you just see ordinary policemen wearing normal clothes. You pass your tents, the normal way is screen tents. In fact, you see the vehicle, maybe police vehicle moving around. There's no, armament, but it's fortified. It's a civilized culture of policing. Everywhere you're monitored.
So that it is understood that house is our house.
So you get the impression people can come and take picture.
Yes.
There was no walls barricading, just like a building.
Yes.
Put it on a hill, on a high place. So the point I make is that the culture, the notion, the cultural or normative value of leadership and governance is still imperial, arising from some of the discussion of colonial
history.
And some of our feudal past. Let's admit some of our feudal past. So it's a neo-feudalism.
Well, when you talk about our feudal past, I keep talking about the fact that this excessive, we had rich monarchs, but their houses were open. Generally,
they were a monarch the
benevolent monarch.
Or for example, like in this Oyemesi Yoruba tradition, where even the Oba himself, or whoever is, can be forced to commit suicide. It's still controlled by some network of accountability.
What do they call it? When in Yoruba land, when a chief is misbehaving, the women can force the chief. They just go to him.
But today's neo-feudal chiefs cannot be forced because the police. So we have even kind of worsened the outcome. We've moved on. We've complicated our small neo-feudal past with colonial lack of accountability and the military violence that characterized our country for a long while. And so when we went, think about this symbolism, when we moved into democracy in 1999, before run up to that, the people who were possible contenders from Musa Yar'Adua, from Obasanjo to others, were people who either had worked as soldiers or security chiefs.
So they had in their DNA.
Exactly. So since then, we've still had either those who are former military, including the current president, or those who were midwife by them. Yes. So basically, we've not broken institutionally from the rule of military dictatorship.
Hey, we have a few minutes. Where do we go from here, Sam? Because we seem to be in a mess when it comes to representative democracy, when it comes to a system of governance that respects the rights of citizens as every person has equal rights before the law, equal rights to be consulted in matters that affect him or her. So discussing this Cama 2020, and I am saying, where do we go from here in our processes of lawmaking, from where we are now to where we desire to be? What are the incremental steps we can begin to take to move? I
think first is that we should optimize this moment. The kind of outcry should be organized into documentations and processes. Like the vice president has said, you guys stop agonizing, organize. It's a good parliament. Of course, it's not an easy thing. You're going to be ambushed, but it makes sense for us to now start activating. Now, we should amplify these voices. You see, we've seen a certain increase in agitation in Nigeria, and it's good. DSS may take different. It's a good thing because our democracy is low-energy democracy. So we are now raising the ante. We are now increasing the decibel of contention. That will force, because we need to have check and balance. Don't forget that the idea of democracy is check and balance.
Check and balance.
So if we are not creating the check to those who are with power, now they will know that, look, some behaviors have moral consequence. People are going to speak up. People are going to be up. So I want to see a greater intensification of civic contention. I want to see our society, instead of people think that these arguments are conflicting. No. Nigeria needs a little bit of instability, of contention, of ideas, not of violence. That people will challenge and take to those in power to task to redefine the context.
How do we get people, How do we get people who are our leaders to recognize that such contentious views, such expression of disparate views are not necessarily lack of patriotism? Because you see, what we're seeing is like once somebody is criticizing a particular action of the people people in power,
they are not a patriot.
They are not patriotic.
Either insurgents,
or whatever.
Terrorists, all kind of things.
How do we get people who get into power to recognize that democracy is about the contestation of conflicting ideas, bring them to the table and argue them non-violently?
Absolutely.
And then come to a consensus?
Well, the way to do that is, there's no way to make an omelette without breaking an egg. It's for religious leaders, personages, some credible people whose credibility cannot be questioned, to now raise their voice. You see, it's like teaching. They need to be educated. We have to be patient with it. We have to also be insistent. We have to keep saying. You see, there's no way that they need to have a culture shock and a culture change. They need to suddenly get to hear that people are saying, no, we can't keep quiet anymore. And then they need to, after some time, they not say, wait a minute, what did they say? It looks like it makes sense. Don't forget that if you look at the US or South Africa, there is always a long process of getting leaders to shift, to see it. Oh, yes, I saw it.
Something just happened.
Stronger arguments.
Something just happened that we just recently ended the Nigerian Bar Association annual conference. And because there was an objection of some lawyers to the speakership of some governor to come to speak at the conference, and then the controversies that followed it, then we are told that there are a new faction is emerging of Nigeria.
Yes, there will be a blowback. But the problem is that action by those lawyers is significant. It's going to create, in the future, a new wave of capability to dissent. People can now mobilize themselves and say, we don't want this. Don't forget that Pence, the American vice president, was stopped from attending, was deplatformed yesterday because of his view somewhere, by a university that invited for some. So it's not new to us. It smacks of that level of intolerance, that new feudal sense of entitlement, that people feel that if X is not invited to something or disinvited from an event, therefore it's a slap on our ethnic or religious group, which is sad. Which is very, silly, very silly, and tells you that we happened with the NBA in 1992 when military rulers of Babangida era, they engineered a crisis that in Port Harcourt that kept the NDA prostrate, lying on the floor for almost a decade. So what we are seeing now is that the struggle over Nigeria to reform it to a modern, tolerant, liberal state that recognizes rights and recognizes people's dissent will take a long time. It will take blowback. People are going to challenge us. People are going to fight back. But as long as we are respectful, non-violent, and insistent, I believe that at some point we'll win. For a space will be created enough that people will recognize the value
and our leaders, those in the
of
executive.
change.
I mean, we need to keep telling those in the executive, advocating for people in power to recognize that a country as diverse as this, there will be
disagreements. There will be contentions.
There will be contentions.
There will be also sometimes flash out.
So be careful about what you identify as hate speech.
That's the point. That's why I'm against this resort to hate speech. The hate speech should be reserved, in classical definition, to speeches that mobilize violence against a people because of who they are.
Yes.
Not speeches that disagree.
Yes.
Like I said, there are some disagreeable speeches. There are some even inconvenient, disrespectful. There's even some immoral speech. But a democracy should allow them. So, for example, somebody can come and say something about you or about President Buhari, and I say, that's a stupid man. And all women people will say, this is a stupid comment. This guy is silly. He has no upbringing. Yes. He's a foolish person.
If for nothing, why doesn't he respect his age?
Exactly. But nobody will say, oh, that speech is national security. How can a speech, before a speech becomes national security concern, it must be a speech that actually is mobilizing people to take action that is illegal. A speech that abuse people. There are many foolish people in the world, and we should accept that there are people that will exist. There are people who will. There are people who
don't know how to talk.
There are people who come and even debase. People are debasing God every day. Yes. People are saying, "Oh, God is a God."
Don't we hear what people are saying about Trump?
Good.
People who are publicly
not even speaking, coming to do effigies, publicly doing something. Yes. And when Obama was president, somebody came even with a gun that was going to kill Obama in a rally. They arrested him, took him away. So I think what our people should understand is that society has come of age. It comes with good and bad. Evil has multiplied. Foolishness will multiply. Goodness will multiply. a sustainable society must have a capacity
to
carefully
shock absorber,
exactly,
capacity
to know how to separate everything,
yes,
to know how to deal with the very dissident and maybe prone to rebellious part of the society, and know how to manage them. The idea that we're going to manicure society in a way that, religious purism that comes from feudal and religious thinking,
it doesn't work.
Somehow society will be made of faithful people,
it won't
made
work.
of the saints, made of people who are respectful, people who are prim and proper, who are ethical, who dress well.
It won't work.
That will not work. That's what is behind all this crisis.
On this note, we bring this segment to an end. I have been speaking with Dr. Sam Amadi, senior lecturer in law, Bayes University, our long-term friend, and we have been discussing the processes of lawmaking generated by the Cama 2020 controversies. What are the processes of lawmaking? How are people to be participants in the policy formulation in their own country? How are people to be consulted? How are representatives of the people to carry the people along? Because as it turns out, many people were not aware that this law was in the offing. So on this note, we bring this to an end. I'm grateful, Sam, for your comment. You will come again for us to keep discussing the Nigerian issues. God bless you.
Thank you.